Well, good evening. My name is Sandra Mowry, and I'm going to be talking about Barcelona. Squeezed between a semicircle of hills and the sea, Barcelona vibrates with a cosmopolitan liberal spirit, pulsing with people working hard by day and playing hard at night, when Barcelona comes alive with late-night restaurants, cafes, bars, and nightclubs. Cervantes said that Barcelona was a city unique by means of its extraordinary beauty and its location. It was here in 1493 that Ferdinand and Isabella welcomed home Christopher Columbus from the New World. Now, Columbus has a statue. The Admiral of the Sea stands on a 175-foot column right at the harbor of Barcelona. And by all accounts, Columbus was quite a disagreeable man. He demanded that he be given the title Lord High Admiral of the Seas, and that he be given 1/10 of all the discoveries that he made. However, Ferdinand and Isabella weren't going to meet these demands, and so Christopher Columbus died surrounded by acrimony. There is a full-scale model of his flagship, the Santa Maria, that is moored quite nearby where this statue is found. Barcelona is the second largest city on the Iberian Peninsula, and it's a city of the sandcastle architecture of Gaudi, of parks that defy convention. And it's not by accident that Picasso, Miró, Dali, and Gaudi all developed their styles here, because something about this city foments a cultural excitement, and it is embracing the latest trends and movements with a long history of innovation and experimentation. But it was probably the sweet waters that tumbled down from the hills to the sea that attracted the very first visitors to Barcelona. These were Stone Age settlers who descended from the very arid peninsula to Barcelona. And although they never ventured more than several hundred yards, from the shore, they would not realize the potential of Barcelona as a port. But others to follow certainly would. It's believed that the first people reaching Barcelona by sea were the Phoenicians in 600 BC. They were followed by the Greeks, bearing gifts of wine grapevines and olive root. And both of those plants did exceedingly well and have flourished ever since in Spain. They were followed by the Carthaginians. And Barcelona actually derives its name from a ruling family of Carthaginians, the Barsas, of which Hannibal was a member. And when Hannibal went over the Alps and wanted to attack Rome, as part of his army, he got recruits of stone slingers from Barcelona. But according to mythology, Barcelona was founded by the hero Hercules and populated by he and his crew from his 9th ship, named 2 words, the Barca Mona. And there is still a street in the old city named for Hercules. After a long struggle with the Celts and the Iberians, the Romans got a foothold and took over Barcelona. Like all of the cities that they took over, they patterned it after Rome itself, with a gridiron of streets and a central forum and markets all around the outside. Now, the heart of this Roman settlement is what is now called the Gothic Quarter, and in those days it was known as Barcino. Barcelona, under the Romans, had a high-level lifestyle. They had central heating, well-paved roads, they had bathrooms with toilets, and a lighting system using oil. But what they didn't have were walls. And because they had no walls, consequently, Frankish and Germanic troops came down, tribes just descended from the north, swept in, and sacked and burned Barcelona. And so when it was rebuilt with fantastic thick walls. But When the Roman Empire began to falter, Barcelona was left vulnerable. And in 711, a very fierce tribe from North Africa called the Moors swept through Spain and took over Barcelona, where they would rule for the next 800 years, leaving their indelible mark on the culture, the cuisine, the architecture, even the faces of the people. It was during this time of Moorish occupation that the very colorful Wilfrid the Hairy came on the scene. Now, Wilfrid the Hairy actually was the first, well, considered the founding father of Barcelona, and he took several counties and grouped them together to form the Catalan state, naming Barcelona as its capital. And he also founded a long line of the Counts of Barcelona that would rule in an unbroken line until 1410. Now, Wilfrid the Hairy is a kind of semi-mythical figure, but he's said to be the inspiration for the Catalan flag. And here is the flag of the Catalan state. It's 4 red stripes on a gold background. Now, as the story goes, Wilfrid the Hairy was fighting the Saracens alongside the emperor when he was mortally wounded. The emperor, in recognition of his friend's bravery and courage, dipped his 4 fingers into Wilfrid's bloody wounds and then ran them down his gold shield. And that was the prototype for the Catalan flag, believed to be the oldest flag of Europe. Now, there's no real accounting for why Wilfrid was called the Hairy. He had a beard, but many people of that time had beards as well. But it was said that he had hair in places where most of us don't. So I'll just let you use your imaginations on that one. But in the line of counts that he founded, feudalism was set up. And during that time, the upper classes, the nobility and the lords, took very unfair advantage of the lower classes. So a kind of Bill of Rights was developed for them to be upheld by the Count of Barcelona. Now, these were supposed to be protective laws, but they were hardly protective because he was allowed to serve justice as he deemed fit. And often it would be the cutting off of hands or feet or the putting out of an eye in an eye for an eye kind of justice. But even women were corporally punished during that time, and they would be punished with the cutting off of ears or noses or lips or breasts, or sometimes there were accusations of adultery made, which could only, by the way, be made by men. And in those cases, they would always be settled by trial by ordeal. The ordeal was that she would be dunked in boiling water. And if she were to survive, her husband was made to keep her and compensate her for her ordeal. Compensation for being dipped in boiling water, I don't think so. But anyway, Barcelona today is divided very conveniently into chunks of city according to time periods, starting with the statue of Columbus at one end and proceeding up La Rambla to the other end and throughout the city. La Rambla is actually one of the most famous and busiest boulevards in all of Europe. It's 5,000 feet of asphalt that is an unending world on stage. La Rambla originally was a river that ran alongside the city walls, and the name actually comes from the Arabic word meaning seasonal stream. But La Rambla evolved quite naturally from medieval times when it was a wide lane down the center of which would ride the wealthy people in their carriages, while the poor people walked in the gutters along the sides. That is until 1850, when they designed special strips to put along the sides for them to walk on called sidewalks. Now, when you go to La Rambla, so I'm going to show you a picture here, you'll see that it's a pedestrian boulevard lined with trees, and there are narrow lanes of traffic down either side. but there's unending activity going on, and you see beautiful flower stalls like this one, and you'll see cages full of chirping canaries, cooing doves, even chattering monkeys as you're walking along. And there are kiosks selling everything from books to food. So these all evolved quite naturally from the medieval vendors and their stalls, and the cafes that you see dotting Las Ramblas are actually sophisticated versions of the food vendors of the Middle Ages. I mentioned that the street is like a world on stage. And what you'll see there are oftentimes people dressed up in costumes with every bit of exposed skin painted all white or gold or silver, dressed up to look like everything from medieval knights to Elvis. And they stand as still as statues until somebody drops a coin in their basket, and then they can take a nice stretch and change their position, or they'll even pose for a picture with you. Along Las Ramblas, you'll see sometimes mimes and jugglers, fire eaters, tarot card readers, fortune tellers. It's really a happening place. Right off Las Ramblas is an open-air market, and this is supposed to be the oldest market of its kind in Europe. It was started in the 13th century when it was just a few tables located at the gates of the city, which was also a site for butchering goats. Today, there are over 500 different stalls in this market, and you can buy every kind of food imaginable, including ostrich eggs that weigh 3.5 pounds. And the last time I was there, it was $20 for one egg, but it would serve 18 people. But of course, you need a hammer to crack that egg open. But at the opposite end of Las Ramblas from the harbor is the Plaza Catalunya. The Plaza Catalunya is the hub of Barcelona, and it's the pivotal point where the old city meets the new city. And the paving stones of the square form a star, and that star represents the center of the state of Catalonia. There are always bands playing in the plaza. You'll see people dancing there. Again, jugglers and other musicians, so always a lot of activity going on in the Plaza Catalunya. Just a few steps away are the narrow, crooked streets of the Gothic Quarter, worn by the footsteps of over 50 generations. As you stand in St. James Square in the center of the Gothic Quarter, try to imagine what it was like back in the Middle Ages. Because in addition to those middle-aged stone buildings, the guild halls, the palaces, and the churches, there were also wooden shanties with straw roofs into which the crowded families of the poor had to live. And up until the end of the Middle Ages, pigs and goats and other animals were just wandering around throughout the Gothic Quarter. And so the streets were just strewn with filth as well. In addition, the beautiful statuary that you see in some of the squares, you have to remember, were also the sites where people were tortured and killed, heretics and masses of the unfaithful, as well as people that were accused of being witches. The palaces of the kings had not only the elegant reception rooms, but they also had the rat-infested dungeons where political prisoners were held. But those straw and wood huts did not survive time and fire. The dungeons have become historical curiosities. But what has survived is a wonderful blueprint of what life was like in the Middle Ages. So we're able to learn so much about it. Now you'll see beautiful fountains that were constructed in the Middle Ages throughout the city. And of course, hollowed logs would bring water from the streams in the hillsides down to these distribution points. And they afforded two wonderful benefits. One of them was made a great place for socializing. The people had to wait in line with their jugs every day to fill them up, and so they would exchange the latest news and gossip and meet up with their friends. But also it was the opportunity for artists to come and make magnificent sculptures. And most of these fountains have a sea theme, like Triton and his porpoises. Now, many of these buildings of the 13th and 14th century are still in use today. And Barcelona has really preserved its medieval nuclei better than most other places. And even cities that did preserve their medieval nuclei, they're actually like empty shells tended by caretakers and hordes of tourists just kind of flowing in and out. But not so in Barcelona. Here the core is not only still standing, but functions as an integral part of the daily life. People are still governed from the town hall that was built in the Middle Ages. Dominating the Gothic Quarter today, just as it did in the Middle Ages, is the Cathedral of St. Eulalia. This cathedral was started in the 11th century and not finished till the 13th century. It wasn't the original church on the site. There was a Romanesque church there, and later when they were excavating for the building of this church, they found relics that predated. They were before the 8th century. When the Arabs came in and burned and destroyed all of the churches, they had collected their relics of saints and hidden them beneath the cathedral here. Now, whenever I go to the cathedral, I like to stop and visit St. Eulalia. First I'll tell you about the nave. The central nave of this church has a number of chapels off the side. One of them is a commemorative chapel to 930 priests and nuns who were murdered during the bloody civil war of the 1930s. Now, St. Eulalia's crypt is located beneath the main altar of the church, and she was the patron saint of Barcelona, and she was put to a horrible torture and death at the hands of the Romans. During that time of pagan Barcino, St. Eulalia was born into that time and greatly disapproved of the morality and the lifestyle around her. So she became a Christian when it was a very unpopular thing to do. And so they locked her in a tower when she wouldn't denounce her faith, and they put her through 13 ordeals, the last of which was being stuffed naked into a barrel. Okay, she was put in a barrel, naked, with glass jars, and then hammered in with nails from the outside and rolled down a hill. That hill that she was rolled down still bears her name. There's a street now called St. Eulalia. And she finally died at the stake. But also at the cathedral, you will see a cloister with orange trees and palm trees, and there are always 13 snowy geese in this cloister, representing St. Eulalia's purity and virginity, but also each goose representing one of the 13 trials that she was put through. Also, near the font of the cathedral, you will see a plaque with the names of 6 natives that Christopher Columbus brought back from the New World and had baptized here. Every Sunday, in front of the cathedral, you can take part in a tradition long held by the people of Barcelona called the Sardana. And here you'll see a band of 11 strange instruments. They'll sit on the steps of the cathedral, and then the people of Barcelona will drop their pocketbooks and their briefcases and their shopping bags and then form a circle around them and start bobbing up and down to the lilting music of the sardana with their toes pointed, feet crossing, and raising their arms up and down as they dance. And anybody is invited to join in. I've also seen them dancing on other days at the Plaza Catalunya, so you might just see that sardana, which was supposedly started by the ancient Greeks, and it was a celebration of the victory of the sun over the darkness each day. Now, during Franco's time, he banned the sardana, but after his death, it was practiced once again. Also in Barcelona, there's an underground museum of the excavated streets of the Romans and the Visigoths, and you can walk along those streets and you can see beneath the cathedral the ruins of that 4th century Romanesque church, as well as some ruins of Roman baths too. Now you'll notice if you go into any churches in Barcelona, they're all very plain inside, and that's because they were all burned out during the Civil War of the 1930s, when 1,200 priests and nuns throughout the entire province of Barcelona were massacred. Outside Barcelona is a mountainous region, Montserrat, and here you will find the citadel of Montserrat with its sacred Black Virgin. This was a Benedictine monastery started in the 11th century, and it flourished when miracles played by the Black Virgin took place, and masses of the faithful climbed the steep climb to worship here and see the Black Virgin, which appeared as a small wooden statue carved in dark wood, hence the name Black Virgin or Dark Maiden, and it was said to have been carved by St. Luke and brought to the site by St. Peter, and then hid away for centuries when the Arabs from Africa attacked and took over Spain. They hid this away in a cave nearby. But carbon dating actually places the statue about 12th century. Now, the Benedictine monks here at the monastery run a 200,000 volume library and a printing press that started in 1499 and is still in use. But they're probably best known for their music school and their famed boys' choir that performs all over the world. And boys come here at a young age and live in the monastery and get training every day to become part of this wonderful choir. And if you're lucky, as we've often been, you might hear them performing at the monastery when you're there. But also there, these mountains that they're in are just spectacular, and there's a funicular that runs from where the monastery is a little higher up into the mountains, and there are wonderful hiking trails so that you can see the really beautiful scenery that is there. Now, this city, with its love of the past, has also always had a flair for the future, the ultra-modern, and the outrageous. And this was led by a kind of one-man revolution of Art Nouveau when modernism took over Barcelona at the beginning of the 20th century, led by Antonio Gaudi. Now, Gaudi is probably one of the most gifted, imaginative, and innovative architects of Europe. And he led the startling revolution of architecture, which was characterized by buildings that had flowing lava-like facades, punctuated by wrought iron balconies and grills and gates. And it used a very adventurous combination of materials like glass and brick and steel and colorful ceramic tiles. And it also borrowed from a variety of styles from Gothic, Islamic, Renaissance, Romanesque, and Byzantine. Gaudi spent his entire professional life in Barcelona, but his creations, which are startling even to our modern-day eyes, were considered eyesores and were ridiculed by his peers. Gaudi hated straight lines, and so he evolved a style using curving arches, cupolas, turrets, columns, flying buttresses, and he felt that the surfaces of things were no less important than the underlying structure, and he took excruciating pains with details. He got the best blacksmiths of Barcelona to execute his designs in wrought iron. He got master tile makers, stone masons, wood carvers, and artists of stained glass. With this kind of help, he was able to create a stunning array of palaces, churches, apartment buildings, schools. He was even commissioned for a factory. Now, his supporters were art students, including a wealthy department store magnate named Güell, and he sponsored some of his most famous works, including this park named for Güell. Park Güell is located the northern side of Barcelona, and it is like a fairyland of like secret passageways, cave-like recesses, and even strange mosaic animals like this signature lizard that he's so known for. At the top of the park is a sweeping terrace, and there are park benches that sweep around the terrace in a wave-like motion, and what they're actually made of are broken pieces of porcelain in a wild array of color. They are really beautiful to see. Here is a little lake in the middle of the park as well, and this park was considered one of the most innovative public spaces since the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. There are wonderful views from that terraced area out over the city as well. Now you can see some of the other works of Gaudi. You can see this one called Casa Mila, also nicknamed La Pedera, which means the stone pit, because this massive cement structure just kind of undulates in a wave-like motion, and it has these wrought iron balconies that punctuate it, and it's about 8 stories high without a single straight line hardly anywhere in the building. Here's one of the lobbies. This is the lobby off to the side if you decide to go into Casa Mila. But their lobby in the front, I would recommend checking that out because usually they have art displays. And the last time I was there, I saw original drawings by Salvador Dali just displayed in the lobby. But if you go into this lobby, you can take an elevator up to the surreal rooftop of the building, which from below looks like peaked meringue or whipped cream, actually. But when you get up there, you can see the giant chimney pots and chimneys, like this one. And of course, the wonderful views out over the city. And these look like medieval knights in armor, and they've been dubbed witch scarers because they say when the witches ride in on their broomsticks and they get a look at these, they turn around and leave the city alone. Now here is another apartment building by Gaudi that's very close to Casa Mila called Casa Batillo, and this is supposed to represent St. George and the Dragon. The blue-green roof tiles are supposed to represent the scales of the dragon itself, and then the balconies and bays are supposed to represent the bones and skeletons of the dragon's victims. I'll give you a little close-up here. They really do look like bones when you look at these. And if you are very interested in Gaudi's architecture, back at Casa Mila on the top floor, there's an educational display that's always there with models and lots of pictures of other buildings and hands-on kinds of things that you can do to see places being built step by step. So it's quite interesting. But of course, his most spectacular work is La Sagrada Familia, Church of the Family. And once he started this project, he abandoned everything else. He was not the original architect. He actually replaced the original architect, and this became his obsession. It inspires awe by its sheer verticality. When you're standing there and look up, it is just incredible. Now, Gaudi envisioned 3 facades, faith, hope, and charity, each one with 4 towers, so it represented the 12 apostles. Now, he got the inspiration for these swelling towers from those mountains that I told you about, Montserrat, that look like the drip castles that we make with wet sand at the seashore. And so that's where he got his ideas for making the towers. And then he encrusted the towers with a tangle of sculpture. When he was asked why he would put so much detail so high up where no one could possibly see it, his reply was, "The angels will see it." Now, he used friends and animals, and he covered them with plaster to make casts in order to make some of these sculpture up here. And during the summer in Barcelona, it's very, very hot, and when covered with plaster, some of these cows and these people were passing out from heat stroke. So it wasn't good to be one of his models. But you can actually go up into the towers and get a nice view. And at the ground floor of the church is a little museum that has plans, the original plans that he drew out. And of course, the church is still not finished even today. Now, this city also nurtured three artists who broke away from convention and changed our view of the world: Picasso, Miró, and Dali, all truly avant-garde. Picasso was probably one of the best known but least understood and one of the most productive artists of the 20th century, or any other century for that matter. He had a personalized view that revolutionized all forms of art, from pottery to sculpture to drawing to painting. He was proficient in them all. And as one of the founders of Cubism, he would take abstract forms and geometric shapes and substitute them for realistic or natural forms. And he would often show an object from many different viewpoints all at the same time, because he claimed, I paint objects the way I think them, not the way I see them. So to convey emotion, he would use distorted shapes and colors, and such as he did in this very passionate depiction, Guernica, which is his depiction of the firebombing that took place at that town, Guernica, during the Spanish Civil War. Now, Guernica was kept at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and I remember seeing it as a student. And he would not allow it to be on Spanish soil as long as Franco was still alive. And so now, after Franco's death, it is in the Prado, and it's under bulletproof glass there. I'm going to take you back to Picasso because I want to tell you a little bit more. He was given an unprecedented honor during his lifetime of having his work shown in the Louvre while he was still alive, and that had never been done before. Now, the Picasso Museum of Barcelona is one of the most visited of all museums. It's in 3 medieval homes, and he himself donated a lot of money to it. It's mostly his early period, but there are representations from each period of his work there. And Picasso, by the way, hated the work of Gaudi. Now, Jean Miró was born and raised in the Gothic Quarter, and he loved art from his childhood on, but he didn't have a natural talent for drawing and perspective. And so Miró had to kind of develop his own style, which was abstract shapes with bold, dark outlines, using lots and lots of primary color. He also founded an art gallery and foundation for it in 1971, and he did sculpture as well, as you can see here. And you can see the largest collection of Miró anywhere in the world in these wonderful light-filled rooms. There are 500 paintings, 159 sculptures, and over 7,000 drawings of Miró in this gallery. He also allows other artists to be shown here as well. I'll give you a little treasure hunt. If you're going to Barcelona and you're going to be walking on Las Ramblas, which I'm sure you will be, look for the sign tile by Jean Miró. It's very large. I'm sure that you won't miss it. Now, Salvador Dali was probably one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century, and very productive during that time as well. He mounted his very first exhibit at the age of 13, And his art was certainly influenced by his dysfunctional family, and his hatred of his father is very evident in many of his paintings. He was one of the founders of Surrealism, and he liked to cultivate a kind of delirium. And he would say, the only difference between myself and a madman is that I am not mad. Well, that point was highly debatable because, for instance, he would claim that he was getting messages from extraterrestrials through his waxed mustache. So we're not real sure about him not being a madman. But he did start Surrealism, where he would take objects out of context, very mundane objects, and then he would distort their shapes and put them in totally different contexts so that he would create a whole new surrealism. And he also stated, the only difference between me and the surrealists is I am a surrealist. So he was quite an ego, that Dali. And he was very much influenced by Freud. And many of his paintings showed a great deal of violence, death, even cannibalism. So he felt that his paintings were a pathway to the subconscious. He also cultivated celebrity friends like Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock and Groucho Marx. And this is the last painting that he ever did. I think we can see he was kind of on that very thin line between genius and madness, even then. And his career included writing. He also did some filmmaking. He designed opera sets, and he even choreographed a ballet. Barcelona has long been a haven for artists and poets and musicians creating their new art. And one of the places they liked to do this was a place called the Four Cats, which comes from a Catalan saying, we're only four cats, meaning we're kind of on the fringes, being artists here, we're kind of on the outskirts of society. And the Four Cats was started when four artists who had studied in Paris and then returned to Spain wanted to capture that cafe, bohemian feel that they had in Paris. So they opened up this cafe, art gallery, and cabaret place called the Four Cats. And it was visited by some of the most influential thinkers and artists of its day. Today, it is simply a restaurant, but I think that you can still visit that if you're in Barcelona. And if you go there and stay there, I hope that you have a wonderful time. It is truly a wonderful city. And I would like to say a special thank you to Ray, the stage manager, and to Mark, who's done the filming, for all their help during my lecture series. Thank you so much for your attention today.